I'm going to be talking a little bit about sustainability and how that relates to food. So, as Vicky said, my name is Josh Liebowitz. I was born in England. I moved to Orange County when I was 15. So if I talk funny, please forgive me. But I grew up here. I went to college at Arizona State. I studied business. I got very into health and wellness while I was there. I've always been a lover of food. So there was a natural intersection of those two things at some point. After college, I was living in Miami and decided that I just could not ignore my passion for food much longer. And in my mid-20s, I decided to go to culinary school. I go to culinary school, I'm loving it, I'm working in restaurants in Miami. This is totally what I want to be doing. And the wheels are in motion for me to put together the idea of one day having my own business, which became obvious had to be something with the intersection of health and wellness and great food. I moved back to California, which is where I'd grown up and gone to high school. I'm introduced to farmers markets, to organic produce on a much higher level, seasonality, things like that. And my connection to food and health and wellness goes to a whole different level. I slowly start to put together the plans for what is now my business, Vibe Organic Kitchen. We have 3 restaurants here in Orange County. They are all organic, all gluten-free, and all vegan. Shh, we say that word very quietly. So that brings me to essentially the topic of my talk here today. Why open a vegan restaurant if you are not vegan? Which is something I get asked a lot, and it's something that often draws a lot of strange response. So I'm here to answer that question. I think it's important to consider health and wellness and what it means to be healthy as more than just as an individual looking good. So people have multiple layers of what is health. So what is health? What's going to make me look the best on the outside? But then we have to consider it on multiple levels too. We have to consider what's going to make me look good on the inside. And then there's a third level of what is going to be good for those around us and the environment around us. So you start to define health as not just eating chicken and broccoli and rice every day, but you start to look at the impact of what you're eating, not just for your outside, but for your inside and for those and the planet around us. And once you make that connection, you start to understand that eating meat 3 meals a day every single day is not necessarily the best and doesn't check all of those boxes. So let's briefly just touch on caloric intake and how kind of the daily caloric composition is made up. If let's say the average person is supposed to have 1500 to 2000 calories a day, we can eat 3 McDonald's burgers a day at 500 calories. And for the most part, we can maintain our weight and we can quote unquote look good on the outside. Now doing that for many years might not quote unquote make you look bad on the outside, but your insides would be wreaking havoc, and the consequences of that diet for those around us would be equally consequential and nasty. So we need to put together a more holistic idea of food and what the ideal diet is and what we should all be eating with responsibility for the billions of other citizens on this planet with us. And what it comes down to is my goal is really to live the longest, healthiest, happiest life, and also to impact those and the planet around me the least. And when you start to think about that, it becomes apparent that maybe we are eating too much meat. And maybe the consequences of our mass agriculture is wreaking long-lasting havoc on the planet and those around us in the forms of illness, sickness, many forms of chronic diseases that can, for the most part, be controlled or regulated with diet. And our mass food industry, which calls for making things bigger and fatter, faster and sooner, doesn't necessarily support those goals. And we make a lot of shortcuts and use a lot of artificial ingredients that our body might necessarily not know and not show the response to right away, but in the long term, those things can add up and cause some pretty, nasty chronic conditions that we're seeing in mass right now. So I start to become aware of the consequences of agriculture and the consequences that it doesn't just have on us in terms of health, but also on the planet. When you consider raising a cow, for example, this is an animal. This has to eat a few times a day. This has to drink water. And these are massive creatures. These are 6, 7, 10, 15 times the weight of a human. So they eat 6, 7, 10, 15 times the amount and drink 6, 7, 10, 15 times the amount of a human. There are a lot of inputs to raising one animal. Every single person in America or on the planet wants to eat meat or animals for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The average breakfast is bacon and eggs, tasty. The average lunch is a turkey sandwich, not bad. And for dinner, most people want steak, and I'm with them a lot of times. But the problem is, as our population continues to skyrocket, and everyone wants meat more and more, and the access to food becomes easier and cheaper, we have to make more and more shortcuts when we raise these animals. We have to make more consequential decisions when it comes to keeping these animals healthy. For example, giving them medication to stop them getting sick from growing so close to each other and living and breeding and excreting so close to each other. Silly humans, they're not going to be able to taste the medication. They're not going to be able to know anything's there. You know, but the animals, it's gonna help us get them to wait faster. So we have to make a lot of shortcuts. And the idea of having healthy, humane meat for everyone is just not reasonable if everyone demands meat 3 times a day, every single day, with a population that's continuing to skyrocket. So then the challenge became obvious. If we're going to have to eat less meat, and I do have to admit, I quite like meat, and I think there's many people that might be with there, we have to make the alternative equally delicious, if not even better. And that was really what I became passionate about for a long time. So once I graduated from culinary school, once I got all my culinary training, I set about trying to make vegetables not just a side dish, but to make vegetables the center of the plate. With the idea being that the more vegetables we grow, the better it is for the planet. The more vegetables we eat, the better it is for us. And hopefully the more vegetables we sell, the better it is for business, which we can build to have a platform that reduces our footprint as we grow, and also educate people on the consequences of dietary decisions and what's best for us and the planet. So I'm not a huge fake meat person. I'm not too into processed foods. And my dietary stance is always to keep things as natural as possible. So if I was going to tackle vegetables, vegan food head on, I knew vegetables had to be the center. I didn't want to rely on tofu, fake meat, soys, things like that, which can be tasty. I wanted to really make this as whole and natural and organic as possible. I had a pivotal moment one day when I was working in a restaurant in Miami, and one of our tasks for the day was, sorry if this scares anyone, but we were preparing pig's ears for a snack. And I was cutting these pig's ears with another chef that was training. And for myself, I'd made a snack of broccoli stems. And I'm eating these broccoli stems. And this guy looks at me, he's like, dude, what are you eating? That's weird. And I'm like, what am I eating? What are you cooking? And that was really a pivotal moment where it made me think that I maybe think about vegetables a little bit differently. And what seems so foreign to many people kind of seemed natural to me. And I knew how good that perfectly roasted piece of broccoli could taste. So I started expanding on that. People would come over, I would cook them dinner, and they'd say, wow, this is amazing. If I could eat this every day, I would do this in a heartbeat. This would be easy. I wouldn't miss meat. More people would say that. It gave me some encouragement, and I finally took the leap to opening my restaurant. So the first Vibe location opened in 2017 in Newport Beach. We were a little bit radical at the time. We were all organic, all vegan, all gluten-free. We don't fry anything. We don't add sugar to anything. So we're quite a hardcore restaurant, but the challenge on the surface was we always had to seem approachable and easy for anyone. And I know that if I'm here trying to tell everyone, hey, we need to eat less meat, hey, we need to eat more vegetables, unless that food is equally as delicious and equally good, long term, I don't think we're going to succeed. So I'm really proud of what we've been able to do, despite how hardcore the food is on the surface when you come to one of our restaurants. They're very cool, they're very hip. The food is filling, the food is familiar. There's Mexican flavors, there's Mediterranean flavors. And it's so fulfilling every day to see people coming in, many for the first time, eating a meal without meat, and realizing, wow, I feel good, I'm full, I'm satiated. And really, my goal isn't to sit here and say, hey, the whole world needs to go vegan tomorrow. Although, if everyone does that, we would be a pretty good, compassionate society. I think my goal is really just to make people understand, maybe for the first time, that you don't need meat with every meal for it to be a full meal. And if we start doing that and we start realizing, then we can have big consequences. So something that I always think about is the idea of Meatless Monday, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, encouraging and rallying everyone to skip meat one meal a week. And that's a great start. And something that I've always held on to, that I learned a few years ago, is if everyone skips meat one day a week, that's roughly 15% reduction in the amount of meat. That would be the equivalent of taking every single car off the road in California for a year. And that is significantly consequential. And a lot of people wonder, well, how does meat equate to taking cars off the road? So I want to maybe dive a little deeper into the sustainability factor of meat and the inputs that have to go in. We'd already talked about the amount of food the animal has to eat, the amount of water they have to drink. So let's factor in the transportation of all this food every single day. From the fields to the factories, back to the farmers, the transportation of the water every day, the one cow drinks, I believe, or skipping meat for one day saves 8 gallons of water per person. So I don't know if that means one cow drinks 8 gallons of water a day, but one cow requires 8 gallons of water as an input every day. So there's very substantial water input, far, far, far more substantial than growing any vegetable. There's a substantial food input. There's the cost of the food physically. There's the cost of the gas and the transportation and the emissions of getting the food there. There's also the massive amount of emissions from a cow itself, which many people might know what I'm referring to. And that creates a significant amount of methane and greenhouse gases in our environment. Something I always think about is, it's so funny, you go to the grocery store and you'll see like ground beef on sale, and it's like 99 cents a pound. And then next to it will be like the organic kale, and it's like $8 a pound. And I'm like, this kale, you throw the seeds in the ground and nature does the rest. You know, this cow, you have to feed that thing a couple times a day, you've got to water it, you've got to clean all the land, maintain. How on earth is an animal cheaper than a piece of kale by 5 times? And I think that goes something to say for the amount of agriculture that's involved in our country and the amount of farmers that we rely on and that rely on agriculture for their well-being, and the government subsidies that are involved in encouraging farmers to grow certain crops. Long run, if I can be a part of the change that shifts the balance and gets people to eat more vegetables, hopefully vegetables can receive the same subsidies that I believe they need. You know, as a government and as a nation, I don't believe we should be subsidizing corn to make corn syrup, corn to feed animals, soybeans to make oil and refine nasty products that cause all kinds of inflammation and early onsets of dementia and Alzheimer's and all these things that are being linked to processed oils. I would love to see us subsidizing the right things, and I really think it's only going to come with consumer preference change that we start to see that tilted balance. I want to touch on one more thing related to the cost of food that I'm very interested in, and that relates to like food in schools, where I believe we also have a lot of ground to make in terms of sustainability and doing better. So it recently came to my attention that across the nation, we have an average budget of about $1.25 to $1.50 per kid every day for school. And surprisingly, you can do quite a lot with that. The problem is the dairy industry has such an aggressive presence in the government that every school is required to provide 1 carton of milk to every kid every single day, regardless of whether they take it or not. And that milk costs about 25 cents. So that's 20% of every kid's school budget is taken up every day by a carton of milk that they may not necessarily drink. And we do have some kids here today, and I'm curious maybe by a quick show of hands, how many of you guys drink milk when you go to school every day? Okay. No, thank you for being honest, and I appreciate that. But you know that's an idea of how consumer preferences and how lobbying and how we can maybe change things in the long term by if this kind of regulation is eased or limited, what that extra budget would do to be able to provide organic vegetables, organic produce, more sustainable sources of food to schools, and how children growing up eating better at a young age, how that might affect their tastes and their preferences moving forward, and the consequences that those will have. There's a lot of us here, you know, a little bit older, might say, yeah, I don't need to change the way I eat. I've been doing what I'm doing forever. And you know what? You probably don't. But the younger generation, you know, we are the ones that have the real responsibility to kind of change and lead and direct things going forward. So I don't want to talk too long here. I'm clearly passionate about the way we eat, about living the longest, healthiest life for ourselves and for the planet. And I really believe that the main way to do that is for us all to be a little more connected to what we eat, to understand what has to happen for that food to get to our plate and make educated decisions. And for me, one way I'm doing that is by eating less meat, more vegetables. I think it's delicious. I'm trying to help show everyone else that it's delicious. So come see us at one of our restaurants. We have 3 here in Orange County. I'm at most of them all the time. I'd love to see some of your faces there. I'm happy to talk endlessly about this. This is my favorite thing to talk about. Come see me. You're welcome to send me a message or an email. You can find Vibe on Instagram at EatDrinkVibe. We're very responsive. I'd love to hear and see from some of you guys there. And thank you again for having me today.